That's a very different concept of efficiency from that you never have bubbles or the market occasionally going crazy. And I think we've learned that we do have to worry about that. Another big defective mental model that we particularly associate with Alan Greenspan was that markets, the financial markets, are going to be self-regulating. Okay. They're not. Their limits, their incentive structure problem that say that's not going to happen. The third big one was the idea that financial engineering had conquered risk. My story there is there was too much attention to financial engineering and not enough to financial economics. So that you had the mathematicians and physicists on Wall Street taking all past correlations as gospel truth and maximizing according to them, whereas any good economist would say correlations among assets are a function of structure, and interdependence, but they're also very importantly a function of the pattern of shocks. And if you get different shocks, you're going to get very different correlations. And you may be tremendously well diversified to some types of shocks, and not at all to others. And so there are a lot of lessons for risk management and so forth. The big one is macroeconomists need to pay a lot more attention to financial science. That's one of the big reasons, I think, why more macroeconomists did not see the crisis coming. And it reminds me very much of the Asian crisis, where the macro fundamentals were basically good in most of the Asian countries. It was the financial sector where things were bad. Paul Krugman recently came out with a not very complimentary article toward economists for why didn't economists see the crisis come? Well, when many economists did, but John Cochran from Chicago had a hit and miss response, but one of the points he had that was dead right was this was a financial crisis primarily, not a traditional macro crisis. And we've had way too much specialization in academia. You do this little area or that little area. So that people who were looking at housing market that saw it coming, but that's not something that most of the macroeconomists looked at. So international macroeconomists learned from the Asian crisis that we've got to pay a lot more attention to the financial sector. And I would think now the advanced economy economists will learn this lesson as well. Clear we need substantive financial reform. We're not going to be able to answer this very well by debating government versus the market. Market discipline clearly failed, but so did government regulation. What's very clear is we need better market discipline and better government regulation. And a lot of the regulation should focus more on how we make markets work better. So there are lots of issues for financial reform. And we see, too, I think one of the clear implications is the emerging market countries like Korea have got an incredibly strong interest in financial sector policies in the advanced economies. So I think it's a wonderful development that we now have the G20 functioning much more. And it's a wonderful opportunity with Korea being co-chairman coming up to have one of the things we talked about in the study is I think it's incredibly important for emerging market economies to be a very strong force in discussions for financial regulation. That we're already seeing tremendous lobbying by the financial sector in the U.S. and the other advanced economies to water down reform. I think one of the very useful functions G20 could play is to have the emerging market economies help stiffen the backs of industrial country leaders to not give in as much to domestic special interests. Because there's very clearly a global interest. We've got a global financial system, and there's very clearly a global interest in what goes on in financial sector reform. So I hope that Korea and other emerging market economies will play a very strong role in trying to see that we get substantive financial reform. What that means, we may want to talk about in the discussion period. Now, let me turn a little bit more to end up specifically a little bit on Korean policy. As I said, I think they've basically been in the right ballpark. I have argued that up to the time of the crisis, I think Korea intervened too much to hold down the wall. That's my main sort of criticism there. One of the things that we document is that we've gone through quite a number of different periods of behavior of the won and of intervention policy. And so the degree of heaviness of intervention has varied very substantially from one period to another. It was moving toward lighter intervention before the crisis. One of the interesting things, though, I think, is a lot of the developments that we tend to associate with the crisis of capital outflows from Korea, depreciation of the won, all started before the crisis went lower and had much more to do with Korean factors. I think the beginning of the depreciation of the won was deliberate government policy to try to talk down the won, which was successful. We know it's very difficult to talk up currencies, but sometimes one can successfully talk them down. And I think that and a lot of uncertainty about Korean economic policy early on probably made a contribution to financial market perceptions that Korea was the most vulnerable of the Asian economies to the crisis. I then argued, though, and this is something that's extremely unusual, and I'm quite used to arguing governments intervening too much. I actually think that the government and central bank probably intervened too little when the won started depreciating in the crisis. The propensity to intervene, which we sort of calculate by the ratio of change of reserves to change in the exchange rate, that actually the lowest propensity to intervene of the various periods that we examined was when the won was depreciating. Now, in my interpretation, and I'll be very interested in getting feedback on this, Korea was in a stronger position than the market recognized. That the market was very concerned about the high level of foreign ownership in equities, and very concerned that there was suddenly between 2005 to 2007 huge expansion in short-term debt. Went up from about short-term bank debt went up from about 60 billion to about 160, something like that. went up about 2.5 times. Now, my understanding is the Bank of Korea was actually following this very closely and thought it was not a serious problem. A lot of it was connected with covering for big increase in Korean investment abroad. That lots of concern of portfolio outflows in the crisis. Actually, net portfolio